안녕하십니까. What About Korea의 함재봉입니다. 오늘은 미국의 노스웨스턴 대학교의 리앤더 헬링 교수를 모시고 한국의 경제 발전에 대해서 이야기를 나눠보도록 하겠습니다. 한국이 어떻게 이렇게 경제를 발전시킬 수 있었는지 여러 가지 이론이 있지만 제가 봤을 때는 헬링 교수의 가설 그리고 이론이 참 흥미롭고 그리고 지금까지의 가설들과는 다릅니다. 그래서 아마 시청자 여러분들도 굉장히 흥미롭게 느끼실 거라고 생각을 합니다. 헬링 교수와의 What About Korea 이제 시작하겠습니다.
오늘 대담의 주인공은 미국 노스웨스턴 대학교 켈로그 경영대학원의 리앤더 헬링 교수입니다. 헬링 교수는 경제 발전과 경제사 분야를 연구하고 있는 학자로 왜 어떤 나라는 부유해지고 어떤 나라는 가난해지는지 그리고 그렇게 만드는 요인은 무엇인지 깊이 있게 탐구해왔습니다. 많은 나라들의 발전 과정을 비교 연구해온 그는 한국의 압축 성장에 주목하고 질문을 던졌습니다. 세입 기반도 취약했고 관료 수도 많지 않았던 한국 정부가 어떻게 산업화를 성공시킬 수 있었을까? 헬링 교수는 이 질문에 답을 찾아가면서 한국 경제 발전의 의미가 무엇인지 국가 발전에 대한 새로운 시각을 제시하고 있습니다. What About Korea? 지금부터 헬링 교수와 함께 그 질문의 답을 찾아보겠습니다.
Professor Heldring, welcome to Korea. Welcome to Law TV, 법률방송. Thanks for being here. When did you arrive in Korea?
Thank you very much, Jabong, for having me. It's a really great pleasure to be here. I got here about a week ago, I think.
Oh, so it's been a whole week.
Yes.
What brings you to Korea?
So I've been interested for a very long time
Uh-huh.
in sort of the process of comparative economic development. So what makes some countries rich and others poor.
Mm-hmm.
And we have many examples that many people study of countries that have gotten rich. You know, England is a case that everyone studies. America is a case that everyone studies.
Sure.
But their processes have taken hundreds of years.
Right.
And so if you think about where are the real lessons for countries that have yet to make that transition, you can choose to look at countries that have taken all that time, or you can think, well, look, which places in the world have also done this, but at a time scale that other places might find attractive. And you come to Korea.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Where else would you go?
Okay.
So we've been thinking, me and my collaborators have been thinking for a long time about the Korean case, and we've developed some ideas, and so this is the time to go, and an opportunity arose to spend some time.
What was the opportunity? What was the immediate opportunity that brought you here?
So the immediate opportunity was that there's a large academic congress being organized here, and that was an excuse.
Okay.
And then we took the excuse and built it into sort of a longer stay. I think we're staying 10 or 11 days in total.
Wow. And this is your first trip to Korea, or how many?
First time ever
First time.
in Korea.
What's your impression so far?
I'm deeply impressed.
Okay.
I think we'll come to talk about many things, but let me just say one thing.
Okay, sure.
So let me just say one thing. So I know that Korea has gone within a generation, basically, through this incredible transformation. And I've been to other places that have grown like that, and typically things tend to get out of control. You know, there's just sprawl everywhere, and nobody really keeps track of anything. So there's lots of buildings that look miscoordinated. There's not enough green, open spaces. There are not enough what people call like third spaces, you know, like where people can meet and hang out.
Yeah.
And here it seems that despite the rapid growth, someone was always thinking ahead. Someone was in charge.
Interesting.
So everything looks like planned as if things were slow and deliberate. But things weren't slow. Things were really fast. And so I've been incredibly impressed with that.
That's really interesting that now that you put it that way, because when I was growing up, right, I was born in '58, and basically it's within my lifetime we've gone from this really poor country to this well-to-do country. But each step of the way, we always said that nobody's doing any major planning. There's not enough greenery. There's like, what happened to the parks that we see in these other advanced countries? And you're right. Now that we sort of look at it now, then it does seem as if it was well planned out. But then at the time, we thought nobody was planning anything. It was just like wild growth everywhere. But that's really interesting. What is your background? Where did you grow up, and where did you go to school?
So I'm Dutch, so I'm from
Okay.
the Netherlands.
Okay.
But I think when I was born in the Netherlands, but I think we were in the Netherlands about 4 weeks when my mother stuck me in an airplane and flew me to Italy because that's where they actually lived.
Wow.
So I happened to have been born in the Netherlands, but my parents lived in Italy, and because both of them are archaeologists.
Wow, fantastic.
And so they're both Dutch, but they're archeologists,
Sure.
and so they lived in Italy because,
course.
you know,
where else?
the Netherlands has lots of interesting things, but not as many interesting things as Italy does. So then we lived in Italy until I was about 6 or 7. And so back in the day, you know, yeah, you're supposed to go to school, but if you just didn't do that,
Yeah.
it was not that big of a deal. But then you can sort of wing it up to a certain age. And
Yeah,
then I
yeah,
got to
yeah.
the age where you couldn't wing it anymore. And then my
Okay.
parents had to decide, do you want to be in school in Italy, be in school in the Netherlands? It was about the time my father retired. So then they decided to move back to the Netherlands.
Wow. So do you
Then-
speak Italian?
Oh, when I was a little kid, I was fluent, but we left just around the age.
Right, when
you know how it
you-
is with
sure,
children. There's
sure.
certain age you have
Right.
to transition from just
Right.
mimicking what other people say to learning the rules. And I
Yeah,
never
yeah.
really learned the rules.
Okay.
So when I'm there, I understand everything,
Yeah.
but I can't really make
okay.
a sentence.
Okay, so
so
you
the-
went back to
We went back to the Netherlands,
right?
and then I went to high school there. I started studying there, and then pretty soon I wanted to leave. So I left to England for a little bit. And
Why did you want to leave? May I
I
ask?
thought, you know, I went to a university which was very good, but I thought, I don't know, I had too much energy, I think. I think I wanted to see more things. And I have to tell you something about the Netherlands.
You became too much of an Italian.
Maybe, you know, maybe.
Dutch and Italian.
Maybe it's like there's too much, there's other things to do. And,
Okay.
And so that took a few years of like being there and studying. But
Wow.
but the Netherlands, I should also tell you, the Netherlands is an incredibly well-run country. Not
Sure.
as well as here, but it's very well-run. But it's very comfortable. You know, people lead a very comfortable life.
And you didn't like that?
I thought, like, I'm too young for that. you
Okay.
know. We need to do something
Okay.
with life. So then I sort of left, and I had a very enterprising girlfriend at the time, and she said, "Look, what we need to do is we need to go to a summer school." And so why don't we do that? And then
Okay.
she went to summer school in Berkeley in California, and I went to the London School of Economics
Wow.
because I liked it there, and I liked it because I had taken a class
Wow.
with one professor in the Netherlands who I'm still in touch with on what he called institutional economics.
Wow.
And that was
Okay.
some hodgepodge of like history and sociology and political science and economics, thinking about, you know, how are societies organized and structured, and I liked that. And he said, if you want to do more of that, you got to go to the London School of Economics. So for some reason, he had that in his mind.
Okay.
So I did that, and then I thought I have to do very well in this class because then I can ask the professors for a letter of recommendation.
Okay.
So I decided that. So I worked very hard and did well, and then I applied to be an exchange student at Harvard for the remainder of my undergraduate studies.
Okay.
So I did that, and then I moved to England to do a master's and PhD at Oxford,
Okay.
and then I moved back to America.
Wow.
Now I'm a faculty member in Chicago.
How long were you at Harvard for?
So initially 2 years,
Okay.
and then I came back for 1 year later on.
Okay.
It was a sort of as a postdoc status.
Okay.
basically.
So undergraduate LSE
So undergraduate in the Netherlands.
in the Netherlands.
Yes.
And LSE you did
Just a summer.
just
one
some?
summer school,
Okay.
yeah,
So
just a
okay,
summer
your
in
girlfriend
between.
was in Berkeley.
Yes,
You were
yes,
okay.
yes, yes.
And then you went to Harvard for the rest of your undergraduate.
yes.
Got it. Okay.
Yes.
Wow. So it was basically one professor or one course that got you interested in this whole field?
Absolutely. Yes. There's basically two pivotal people.
Mm-hmm.
So one was this one professor in the Netherlands who decided that the undergraduate economics curriculum was sort of very focused on sort of standard economics, and decided I'm going to teach something more broad.
Yeah.
And I didn't really understand how all the papers that we were taught were put together, but I thought that the questions were really interesting.
Yeah.
And so I thought, okay, how do I do that? And then I went to LSE, and then I ended up at Harvard, and there I think we'll get to talking about that. There I took another class with a professor who sort of managed to explain really how do you do this, and why is it relevant, and why is it important, and that sort of changed everything.
Fascinating. That's you were so lucky, actually.
Very, yes.
Do you think your background influenced your decision to become are you an economist, economic historian, or
I'm an economist.
you're an economist? Okay. So actually, you already explained how you got to that. But so then, what is your in economic history, or what is your main focus? Can you say, is it economic history, or what do you call that?
So I
officially?
think I'm interested in what's called comparative economic development. So why some
Okay.
places are rich
Okay.
and others are poor. And
Right.
I think if anyone asks themselves the question, so
Yeah.
why is their country,
Yeah.
like let's talk about Korea, say,
Yeah.
like why is Korea rich,
Yeah.
or why is Korea poor? You know, you can point to a lot of factors that happen today,
Sure.
like some economic policies, what the people do, some politics perhaps, but lots of people also start talking about the recent or more distant past. And it's clear that that a big part of why the world income distribution looks the way it looks is because of the accumulated effect of past events. So I think even if you don't have an intrinsic interest in history, it's sort of inescapable if you have an interest in explaining differences between places today to think about the past.
Exactly, and Koreans are fascinated by their own very recent history. In fact, our politics is all about actually how to interpret how we got here,
Yes.
right? So we have different interpretations, and I think that really goes to the basis of the political divide, political division, different ideologies and different
understand
political orientations as well. I was fascinated. Your work on the origin of government or origin of state. Why do you start there, or did you start there? How did you get to that question? Because when you talk about economic development, there are all kinds of theories about how we got to where we are, but you don't necessarily go into the origin of state or origin of government, right?
No. Let me talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
So, I think people differ, and have differed for a very long time, fundamentally, on their view on government. So, is government fundamentally something that exists for our benefit, and we need to control it
Right.
in some way, because there's a lot of money on the table, and
Yeah.
we have to constrain politicians from misusing that. But in principle, there are services, there are things that the government does that is good for us. And in principle, we should be trusting government until we don't.
Right.
But there's an opposite view that is current in many places, which is, well, government is basically just a vehicle for people to enrich themselves, and we might actually just be better off with much less of it. And so that is not a
Sure.
I paint the ends of a spectrum, right?
Sure.
People like somewhere in between.
yeah.
But that is a very old question.
Yeah.
This is the question that Marx asked himself. This is
Yep.
a question that Thomas Hobbes and John Locke asked themselves.
Yep.
It goes back to Plato and Aristotle.
And Confucius asked
And
that
Confucius
question.
too.
Sure.
Exactly. So that is it's a question that by all these authors too is, as a thought experiment, pushed back to the origins of government. So like, okay, government today is very complicated. So why don't we think as a philosophical thought experiment in many cases about the state of nature?
Yeah.
Right? Let's put ourselves back in
Yeah.
history and think, okay, fine. What is the initial sort of spark? Like, why did it start? And so if you can come up through either, so in the earlier philosophers that you know very, very well, it's an actual thought experiment. Right? So let's hypothesize a state of nature,
Sure.
think about what it looks like,
Sure.
and so then logically deduce why a government comes about to learn about its fundamental nature. And then in anthropology and in history, people started studying actual early government to say, well, we have the logical treatment on one side, can we deduce some facts? And so this makes it a very long-standing question in
Right.
other disciplines.
Right.
And my impulse was, well, what are we as social scientists good at?
Right.
So we'll maybe try to do something empirical.
Right.
And so I thought, well, this is a important social science question, so why don't I try to have a crack at it?
So, this may be getting a little too deep into your work, or maybe a little bit too complicated for this kind of a discussion. But for instance, your work, which I just briefly skimmed, which works on the rise of the state along Euphrates and in Iraq, for instance. I mean, how do you go about quantifying? How do you go about empirically studying something like to prove whether social contract theory is correct or closer to historical truth, or some other theory of how government came about? How do you even think about? How do you think about what's the word, operationalize or quantify that question?
Yeah, let me maybe just take a step back
Yeah.
for the audience
Yeah.
and just position ourselves. So one of the places that we study in high school as one of the origins of civilization,
Sure.
not just government, civilization, where we learn like about the stars, and we invented mathematics, and we invented law, and there's,
Yeah.
of course there's other places where
Yeah.
we did that too, but this is one of the places
Sure.
where we did this, is what the Greeks called Mesopotamia.
Yeah.
So Iraq,
Right.
the Euphrates and the Tigris, we learn
Tigris,
about
right.
that. And this is one of the places where government first emerged.
Right.
And so it's one of the places where we can ask ourselves the question,
Uh-huh.
and you use the word, is government fundamentally due to a social contract in which we, as citizens, are happy to give up something, say some amount of freedom or
Right.
some amount of money,
Right.
in
Property,
return
right,
for something?
right.
What is that? We'll have to get to talking about this, but you get something. Maybe you get some
Right.
law process, some protection, something.
Sure.
On the other side, again, you'd say like, well, we're just citizens, we're just stuck, Like, the people in the government have a sword, have a gun, and we don't, so here we are paying taxes. Right? And so it turns out, I was reading a lot about Mesopotamia, trying to understand, and of course in Mesopotamia, government emerges before or with the emergence of writing.
Right.
So what do we know today about governments? Well, it's mostly governments writing themselves, keeping records and
much-
documents on themselves. So how do you know about it early? You can't really. So you have to do something else.
Wow. How much record is there of their own record keeping from that period?
Well, I'll tell you something which is a little bit surprising. You know how these people, they used to write on clay tablets.
Right,
You'd have a bit of
Cuneiforms,
clay and
right.
you impress something on it and you bake it. And so
Right.
it's very durable. So we have
Yeah.
thousands and thousands of these clay tablets. The problem is all of them are really boring.
Yeah.
Like it's basically just
Sure.
receipts.
Yeah.
It's list of items.
I see,
Like
okay.
I showed up on Wednesday morning and I gave you this stuff and this is what
Yeah.
you gave to me.
About two
So-
apples from me. Right?
Exactly. So it's
Right.
like that. So
Right.
so only later on do we get a little bit more reflective documents, and it takes about 1,300 years
Wow.
until we get to the famous
Wow.
Hammurabi law
Hammurabi,
code.
right, right, legal code,
That's a
right.
long time after
Sure.
people first started writing. So then, how do you learn about what people do early on? So one thing that is remarkable about this part of the world, and this is, as far as I'm aware, only done in the Oaxaca Valley in Mexico for places where states first emerged, is that because archaeologists have been so interested in this part of the world for a very long time, they've basically walked the desert hand in hand, as it were, and picked up everything. So we basically, for the area, we know exactly what happened where, when. Think about it. And so that offers an opportunity to look at archaeological evidence and ask yourself, can we actually think about some intellectual approach that helps us pull apart whether people form these governments voluntarily or whether they happened as an imposition?
Sure. And you found that
if you look at different places where government should have happened voluntarily because there was a problem to solve together, or other places where there was nothing to solve but a lot to steal, then government happens only in places where there's a problem to solve together.
Wow.
So the evidence there is fully consistent with early government being social contract based.
No kidding.
So, but I should caveat that right away, because you set it up because there's a problem to solve. We need to work together. Right? There's many problems that every society has to solve. We need to work together. But now you're stuck with the government.
Right.
So now what do you do?
Right.
So basically, right after it's set up, you see that different government starts diverging. Some of them remain sort of cooperative, contractarian, and others become repressive and kleptocratic, basically, right away.
Wow, that's fascinating. You would have thought, because I guess most people's intuition, including mine, would be that social contract theory is sort of this like creation of some philosophers who wanted to justify a democratic system of government, which comes much later. Yes. And previously, it's always been sort of the imposition thesis that just seemed more intuitive. But then you're telling us that actually any form of government arises only when there is a major cooperative project to be done.
Yeah, I think part of the logic is that you can only impose on people so much. You know, people run away.
Right.
Just go somewhere else. Why would I sit here and be imposed upon if I can go over there and do something else?
That's
so
right.
I think you can only impose on people systematically if you can keep them in place too, for which you need some power to begin with.
So Professor James Robinson and Acemogu's work on Why Nations Fail, right at the beginning they compare the rise of the colonial state in Mexico versus colonial experience in what is now the United States, where you can't impose because people run away. There's no settled large population that you can exploit. So eventually you sort of have to bring people in from Britain itself, England itself, and then eventually give them property and rights in order to get them to work. So I guess so did they get that insight from this kind of work? That to really have a functioning state, it has to be a sort of a contractarian base?
Well, they certainly didn't get it from my work, because I did it much later. But but I think there is a logic there, which is very similar, in the sense that so they emphasize beneficial outcomes like investment, right, property right protection, creativity, which ultimately find their usefulness in their downstream outcome, what you're going to get, right? If you're going to invent and you get nothing for it, well, why would you do it? And so behind that lie a series of laws, institutions that make that worthwhile. So if these are, again, to come back to our previous example, if these are all set up for the benefit of a small group to expropriate the rest, well, that's what they would call an extractive institution. And so if a government is initially set up in sort of a social contractarian, what they would call inclusive way, then as they emphasize as well, it's a subsequent continuous struggle to keep it that way.
Yeah.
Right? And my country and Korea too have had a sort of continuous process going from different parts of that spectrum to keep it
Got it.
going.
So how does this, your work on the origins of government or state, how does that relate to Korea in your mind? How do you relate that to Korea? Korean
Well,
case?
I mean, first of all, this was done as a sort of a big social science question that, of course, like stands empirically in the very distant past. But coming back to the initial sort of motivation that we talked about, there is a view embedded in this way of thought on what fundamentally is the nature of government. Does it do something useful for us or not? And let me tell you a story that we talked about briefly offline, but that I like. So I go to Africa a lot, and I think about development in Africa a lot, and then I ask people, so who do you want to emulate? What are your examples? And maybe naively, I would expect, we'd like to be like America or something. And nobody says that. So they say Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and you push a little bit. And it's for two reasons. First is something we already did discuss, which is Korea got rich in sort of recent living memory. So that's interesting. So if you're interested in getting rich, it's great if it can be quick. But second, the view, and we'll come to talk about that, I think, is that the Korean government was sort of in a beneficial way involved in Korea's development process. So if you're a policymaker in Africa, this is what you want to hear, because it gives you agency over the process. You know, imagine I told you, well, it's all the free market, there's nothing you can do. Well, then what do? You just sit there and wait and nothing happens. But if I told you, no, there are actual coordination issues of focus, of priority that the government can help with, then it's no longer a matter of, well, we sit and wait, but it's like, okay, we can do something, what it is we do.
Okay.
And so in that sense, one can take a view of Korea's government as being in part good, in the sense that, and this is part of scholarly debate, of course, but in part that they seem to have done something that has been beneficial.
So now I understand better where you're coming from, because in our earlier conversation, you talked about how, comparatively speaking, when, for instance, President Park Chung-hee was starting his industrialization process, that the state capacity or the government capacity of South Korea in terms of the number of bureaucrats, tax base, that it was actually a very small state. Tell us about that. How you're approaching this whole question of Korean economic development in terms of state capacity.
Yeah, so when you start thinking about Korea's development as an outsider, you start reading. And one thing that's emphasized over and over and over in the literature is Korea's government involvement. You know, its industrial policies, sort of the national determination that was brought to bear to this project. And the way sort of that is conceptualized in the social science literature is by this notion of state capacity, right? Which is sort of some broad term which emphasizes what potentially could a government get done. And
big, strong state.
Yeah, that's hard to measure. So one way we measure that is just, okay, how much resources do you have? How many people do you have? That's a simple way of saying
Okay.
like how much can you get done? You know,
Yeah,
the,
yeah.
the United States government has more money, so it can get more done than other governments.
Right.
Fine. But then you actually look at, for example, Park Chung-hee's government, and I did the calculations a few days ago. If you look at the fraction of government employees that work in the pivotal economics ministries, so Ministry of Commerce, Ministry of Finance, Economic Planning Board, it is about 0.4 of 1%. So less than 0.5%
Uh-huh.
of government employees
Uh-huh.
work in these ministries.
That
Under his government.
supposedly drove
That supposedly
industrialization.
drove
Economic
industrialization.
development,
And so there's about 200,000 people working in the Korean government at the time, but it's mostly people in the railways, postal service, teachers.
Okay, all of them combined.
Yes,
okay.
all of them combined. And so it's a very small part of the government works in those ministries. And then either way, if you look at government revenue, so by the time we get to 1970, the national budget, it basically doesn't depend on foreign aid anymore. I think it's about low single digit percentage of the national budget that still comes from America. So then you have to look at domestic revenues. Right? And so the way we measure that is to look at total tax receipts normalized by GDP. And that hovers somewhere around 12-14% at the time. So that number may not make a lot of sense, but that is around the level of like Mali
Okay.
or Cameroon
Okay.
today.
What's
So-
the average level? For instance, what's in the Netherlands? What is it like in the U.S.?
Oh, in the Netherlands, in America, it will be in the 40s,
In the 40s
right? So 40%
of GDP.
of national output will be collected in some form of taxes by government. So 14% is very low. Comparative perspective, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, puts out this guideline that below 15% you can't really run a viable government. Okay, so
Okay.
so now we're in a situation where
Wow.
where the Korean government has very little money. It employs very few people in supposedly their key activities. Yet we all think that it's able to completely transform its economy and be directly involved with all these
in
different
everything.
firms, be constantly engaged with the chaebol, be engaged with infrastructure development, be engaged with pivoting into completely new industries, right? Like pivoting into shipbuilding,
Heavy
pivoting
industries,
into
right? Petrochemicals.
petrochemicals,
Yeah.
pivoting into the
Electronics,
automobile industry,
yeah.
and then pivoting into electronics,
Yeah.
into computers,
Yeah.
into chips.
Yeah.
And okay, so that is a puzzle.
That's fascinating because I don't think Korean economists have really thought about it, or social scientists have thought about it in those terms. We've always thought that we had a very powerful state, then it's always the civil society that was weak, and then we say that, okay, the powerful state may have driven through its very authoritarian means, mobilizing resources and forcing people to contribute and stuff like that. And then we get massive economic growth, and then it's only after civil society then grows, then forces the government to let go of its power, and then we go through democratization process, and that's where we are. And so we always have this thing about, okay, is the state becoming perhaps too weak or too democratized, et cetera. And that's part of the political debate. But you're saying that it was never that big. It was never as big as compared to any other advanced countries, especially, and then it's only in the level of a Mali, and then you get economic development through what? What is your hypothesis?
So I think you're putting your finger exactly on the puzzle, because I think the impression that the government was strong is exactly right.
Okay.
And I think the idea that civil society then pushed back and then there's a democratization process, I think that is all entirely correct. But then the question is, how was the government strong
Right.
if it wasn't through its application of resources?
The military?
The military
Okay.
is probably part of it.
Right.
And one other aspect that we've become interested in is, for lack of a better word, the government application of what in America would be called the East Asian way of doing business.
Which is
Meaning, meaning business is done through personal relationships.
Okay.
So you and I knowing each other in various ways, being
Right.
connected
Right.
through various social
Right.
channels, sometimes even being connected through familial ties.
Uh-huh.
That is important. This emphasizes being important in business relationships in East Asia in a way that in America perhaps it wouldn't be. You know, you could perfectly well do business with somebody you hate. That's not a problem at all.
Okay.
And so let's now take that idea and
Yeah.
like think about that in the context of government.
Okay.
So if you go to, for example, to President's Park's museum,
Yeah.
as I did yesterday.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yes. So what is the impression that's being given? So the impression that's being given is that President Park never sits at his desk. Although they have this sort of somewhat interesting replica of him sitting at his desk actually in the museum.
That's right. You really.
But everything else is about him relentlessly traveling the country,
Right.
meeting with everybody all the time, just all the time, shaking hands, impressing upon people how important it is.
Be it farmers or industrialists or
But for the country,
yeah.
I don't think there's anyone running a big firm in America who thinks that they're doing this for the country.
Okay.
They're doing this for themselves, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, you're not supposed to, according to Adam Smith.
Yeah,
right?
like who cares about that? It's
Right,
like, you know,
right,
it's the
right.
pursuit of profit is what
Right.
you have a fiduciary
Yeah.
duty to your shareholders, and that's it.
Yeah.
So let's take that observation and run
Okay.
with it a little bit.
Okay.
So imagine that you're sitting in the Economic Planning Board in 1978.
Right.
And you have to understand, what are all these firms doing? I need to plan for the next 5 years. Okay? What are all the chaebol groups or what are the companies in my country doing? There's a few ways of doing this. You could set up a research institute, send out researchers that gather data which they observe from transactions between
KDI,
firms
right,
and consumers. Yeah, this is like the Bureau of Labor Statistics
right,
in
right.
America. Or what you could do is you get on the phone
Yeah.
and you
I see.
think that getting on the phone works
Okay.
because you know your counterpart, you
Yeah.
trust your counterpart.
Yeah.
And so getting on the phone is cheap
Yeah.
and going around gathering data is expensive.
And
So
it's faster too.
It's faster too. So,
Right,
so one hypothesis is that the connectedness between state and society
Okay.
was a way
Okay.
in which you could more effectively implement policy
Uh-huh.
than what the resources you have would suggest you could.
Okay.
And now I should emphasize here
Okay.
that, of course, in the Korean literature, these sort of connections between
Right.
state and society are very well known,
Right.
very well described,
Right.
very well studied, and
Affective society.
effective society,
Right.
exactly, and are very often described, perhaps less so under Park Chung-hee than under his successors, actually, as vehicles of corruption.
Right. Sure.
And I think that that's right, and I think that was part of what was going on.
Two sides of the same coin.
But perhaps it's a two-way street.
Yeah.
You know, you ask something from me,
Yeah, yeah.
and I ask something from
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
And part of the puzzle, which I haven't resolved, and that's part of the reason why why we are here, is that why didn't that collapse? You know, why didn't it collapse into full corruption? Why was it actually usefully applied to steer entire business groups to move into different industries and to find sort of this cooperative equilibrium? Now, going back to what we talked about, we don't have to use the word social contract, but there is some sort of cooperative
Yeah.
equilibrium,
Yeah.
of course, in which, and we know this in the Korean context, in which if you don't play ball,
Yeah.
you will be punished in some way.
Sure.
But if everybody cooperates, there's something like 10% growth on the table.
Wow.
And I can't really say I fully understand it yet, but that's why we're here.
Okay, so but then tell me how. So, for instance, when Netherlands was first industrializing, developing, or United States or Germany, I mean, when you didn't have any industry to speak of, and you had very little state capacity, you had to start somewhere, like where President Park Chung-hee started, right? Even in those, so. But you're saying that the South Korean experience is different even from the earlier experiences of these now advanced states.
We've actually been having a lot of discussions about this issue, this visit here, because it seems that there's something fundamentally different about having to invent something from scratch or being able to sort of pick and choose from things around you that work and that don't work. Right. So when the Netherlands industrialized comparatively late actually within Europe, so it industrialized only in the second half of the 19th century, a full century after England did.
They didn't really need to.
So yeah, they were very
so
rich already.
right?
They're sort of hanging out, doing nothing, and so fine. But at some point they had to. And the reality of that process was that it's essentially taking what was already there, so small scale artisanal production, and scaling it up. So in the textile industry, for example. I think in some sense, it is not so different from the Korean case in the following case. So after Japanese colonialism and everything that happened with that, there was a sort of small industrial base in Korea. And so to some extent in my reading of the evidence, that what Korea did too is that it took what it had and it tried to scale it up until it was at the point where it could expand into other things. For example, the steel industry, what it never had, and then it built that up. So my sense is that these cases that are sort of not the first, so not England, but the other cases, Netherlands was after, Germany was after, Korea was after. It's basically saying, well, what are our strengths, and let's build on that.
So do you find the pre-existing explanations about Korean economic development or East Asian economic miracle, the Four Tigers, or now China, what are the parts of the explanations that you find unsatisfactory, and that you think that your research fixes or at least adds to?
So I think there's three parts to this. The first part is the economic policies that were actually done. And I think we actually understand those very well. I think there's a very long, sort of robust intellectual tradition in Korea, sort of studying what actually happened, what was done, and evaluating individual aspects of policy. So think about a particular industry drive, think about a particular labor market policy, think about democratization afterwards, and that you've worked on too. And so I think that actually works well, and I learn a lot from that. I think one level behind that is part of what I'm trying to study. So suppose we set ourselves this policy target. How is it actually done?
Oh, I see. Okay.
And I think the Western intellectual tradition is actually falls short completely, because what they've done, they look to from the outside and they see a government that was effective. And so then what has happened is that we as Western scholars have said, well, what do we know about a government that is effective? Essentially, the only model of effective government that we have is basically look like Denmark or Germany or something. So because it was effective, it must therefore have been organized like we know effective government to have been organized in Europe. And so I think that has sort of led to a focus on things that sort of didn't really exist. It's like a Western form of state capacity that is not there. And I don't think that is resolved. My impression this week from talking to many Koreans is that to the Korean scholars, the Korean way of organizing government is sort of so natural that
Can't
it's not
objectify it.
well, it's not even like objective. It's not problematized.
Yeah.
In the sense that it's not unique.
Yeah.
Right? In the same way,
Right.
like you live in Europe and you
Right.
don't think the way Europeans do things is unique until you see sort of the comparative contrast, like really clearly. And so we've been reading a lot about this in the Korean literature to the extent that it's accessible to us, and we're trying to sort of work our way around that. So I think in the Western literature, that is definitely not there. I think the Korean literature is much further advanced on that point, but that's something we're working on. Now, the third layer behind all of that is the sort of broader comparative perspective. And I think there's actually really very little on that.
Right.
So imagine you were to pick up
Right.
Korea's policies under Park, but also in the 80s and then after democratization, and you were to pick them up and try them in Latin America or in Africa. There's this sense, when you go to the museum or when you talk to people here, is that, well, at some point the government decided that we're going to do this, and then they got on the phone and they tried to do this, and then it happened.
Yeah.
I can tell you there's many parts in the world where the government decides something, they get on the phone and nothing happens.
Right.
In fact, the opposite happens. There's some money on the table,
Right.
people come and get it.
Right.
And so that comparative perspective of like, okay, we understand what the policies are, we understand how they're organized, but now why does that work in one place and not another? I think there's actually pretty much nothing on that in economics and little in other social sciences.
But that sounds a lot like you're going towards something like cultural explanation, which I don't think you what you're trying to do. But most people, when you get to that point, would say, okay, it's cultural. Why wouldn't you just say it's cultural?
Yeah, could be.
Okay.
But I'm not sure.
It explains anything.
I'm not sure. Well, I think it explains a lot.
Yeah.
But for that, we'd have to define first what it is that we're after. So in Korea, for example,
Okay.
it's only a particular point in time that things start moving. So did the culture change at that moment? I don't think it did.
No.
So then you say, well, okay, fine, but that's the policy aspect of it.
Right.
Before, no productive policies were
Right.
pursued in that, maybe. You can ask yourself, well, why do the experiences of Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and later China, why do they look so similar? Does that have a cultural component? Well, could be,
Yeah.
but it could also be that Japan innovated a model which was then taken and adapted.
Right.
One could say, well, this idea that so let me rephrase. The venerability of government, that being in government or being a
Right.
policymaker, that is
Right.
something to look up to.
Right.
And so therefore, if you're in the government, you have a natural form of authority, or the emphasis on education,
Sure.
that may be something cultural. And, but there's other parts in the world that have that.
Sure.
So I study England a lot. The elite in England went to Oxford and Cambridge, and they held sort of positions in society that were held in some regard. But the government didn't do anything. They did nothing in regard to industrial policy. So they started doing that in the 20th century, way after industrialization happened.
Right.
And think about cases of very rapid growth more recently, like Rwanda or Botswana, places like that.
Yeah.
They have very different cultural traditions.
Right.
And things grow there. So I think culture is like a very important part of it, but I think for every cultural trait that you think is important, you can find places that have that where nothing happens.
Yes, I see. So, okay, what is the next phase in your? Now, okay, so you go back now, back to Chicago, back to Northwestern. You sit down and I guess try to organize whatever you have learned this time. Where do you think the next stage will be of your research will be? Where is this taking you? What is the ultimate goal? Are you writing a book? Are you writing a paper?
So the immediate goal is to write a paper
Okay.
on the second out of the three issues. So
Tell
this
us
is the organization.
Okay.
So you set yourself a goal, being the Korean government, whether it's in the 1990s, the 80s, the 70s, say we're going to push this particular aspect of our economy. How do you do it? So that is the immediate objective, to write an academic paper about this. We have some preliminary results. So in fact, this afternoon and tomorrow we'll have some presentations at Korea University and KDI to sort of present some things. And that has to turn into an academic paper. And then ultimately down the line, we want to write a book, but that has to involve more of the comparative perspective.
Okay.
So Korea, we've been doing a lot of work in Rwanda as well, England, and so the comparative perspective, so that we have something to say about what are the conditions under which we can expect something like this to work.
Sure. Fascinating. I understand that you work very closely with Professor James Robinson, and you're here this time with him at the conference. But what is your working relationship with him? How do you collaborate? I mean, I'm always fascinated when multiple intellectuals coordinate and write these papers and books together. How do you work with him? How did you come to work with him, first of all?
Oh, this is a funny story. I'll tell the story.
Okay.
So he was teaching at Harvard, and I came there as an undergraduate student. And he very generously let me take his PhD class on comparative economic development. So I sat there, and I was very fascinated, but I'm not sure I understood very much. But I was really working very hard and trying to get all of it and trying to read everything.
Why were you interested in a graduate course?
Oh, because this was the one that he was teaching. So he wasn't teaching an undergraduate class, I don't think. Okay. And it had some sort of title, something comparative economic development, and I liked that.
Okay.
So just I'll take it. Yeah. And then we had talked maybe once or twice, and then at some point he asks in some class, like, does anyone here know Latin? And I knew Latin because I'd done like 6 years of Latin and ancient Greek in like high school, and so I could read it.
In the Netherlands?
In the Netherlands, yeah. In the Netherlands, you teach Latin and ancient Greek in high school.
No kidding.
Yeah, so I knew all of that, and so I was like,
is that mandatory almost?
No.
But you did.
So there's a few levels of high school, and if you do the highest level, you can go sort of one half step up where you get everything else plus Latin and ancient Greek.
No kidding.
And so I did that, and so then I sort of knew that.
Yeah.
And then I said, okay, and we'll go to his office, and we look at these old books that have all this Latin in it, of descriptions of the English economy in the 16th century. Anyway, we ended up writing a paper about it. But that's how we got to know each other, and we got to talking, and then he asked, so why don't you come work with me for a year? So after my undergraduate degree, before I went to graduate school, I worked for a year at Harvard with him on various projects.
I see. That's why you were there for 2 years. Okay.
Yeah, and so that's how we got to working together, and we've been working together since. And so we know each other very well by now. So then the working relationship is very simple. We call each other on WhatsApp, and we coordinate, and so these projects are very data intensive. So each project basically has a team.
Yeah.
So with myself and Professor Robinson as sort of the principal investigators, and then usually we have one full-time employee below that, a research assistant, and then part-time people supporting that person.
Wow.
And so each project has a little hierarchy like that.
Wow.
And now we talk almost every day.
So, when do you plan to come back to Korea again?
Well, as soon as I can. You know, I'm teaching in the fall now, so I have to,
Okay.
from now until December, I have to be in Chicago, and in that time we hope to sort of process our results, and I'm sure then we'll come up with many more questions. So
Okay.
I hope, next year, early
Okay.
2026 at the latest.
Okay, got it. Well, again, thanks for doing this, and really good luck, because we are on your research, because Koreans we're certainly celebrating our success, or trying to, but also trying to understand it and trying to explain it. People at places like Korean Development Institute and other governmental, I guess, think tanks, they always get a lot of, they say that they get a lot of bureaucrats from other developing countries that want to come here and trying to learn the Korean experience. And I always get the feeling that there's very little that we can teach them about why or how we got here, because we have very little understanding, it seems to me, of how we got here.
When we talk to people here, we get many questions on like Korea's current problems and of aging, politics, and so my answer to this is like, well, 50 years ago you had much bigger problems and you solved all of these very successfully. So I don't understand why you couldn't solve these too. It seems like you've done all of the hard work and you've shown that this can be done extremely successfully. Economically and then also politically afterwards. So it was Korea's own society that moved through the democratization process, and that is all Korea's own achievements. So I think the rest should be possible too.
Yeah, no, we half jokingly say that our greatest strength is always complaining that we're in a major crisis and that this is all going to fall apart next year, right?
Maybe it creates a sense of urgency.
Maybe it does, but I really look forward to your research, and please do come back and visit us again.
I will. Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you. 네, 지금까지 그 노스웨스턴 대학의 리앤더 헬드링 교수님하고 인터뷰를 했습니다. 이번에 제임스 로빈슨 교수하고 같이 방한을 하셔갖고 열흘 동안 물론 학회도 참석을 하셨고 또 발표도 하셨지만은 그 무엇보다도 한국의 이 경제 개발 경험에 대해서 그거를 연구를 본격적으로 시작했기 때문에 한국 경제 발전의 답을 얻으려고 하고 있습니다. 오늘 특별히 모셨던 이유는 정말로 새로운 각도에서 지금까지 대부분의 경제학자들, 특히 개발 경제론 이런 거 하는 분들이 잘 미처 생각하지 못했던 그런 부분에서 한국 경제 발전사를 조명을 하고 있기 때문에 참 그 중요한 작업이라고 생각해서 오늘 특별히 모셨습니다. What about Korea? 지금까지 시청해 주셔서 감사합니다. 다음 시간에 또 뵙겠습니다.